Mrs. President, distingués membres du Conseil de sécurité,
distinguished members of the Security Council,
Abdallah Wafi, Permanent Secretary Sidikou of G5 Sahel, it is my pleasure to address this Council today and to provide an update on the operationalization of the G5 Sahel Joint Force, the international support provided in this regard, including by MINUSMA, and to update on challenges encountered so far as well as possible measures for further consideration as requested by Resolution 2391/2017. Mrs. President, distinguished member of the Council, I do not need to remind you that the security situation in the Sahel is dire. Just yesterday, we once again received reports of a shooting in Ouagadougou. Over the last weeks and months, the local security forces in the Liptako-Gourma Triangle, but also international forces and MINUSMA, continue to face devastating terrorist attacks, including on 18 April in Timbuktu. However, let's not forget those who suffer the most, the local population, civilians who continue to be intimidated and harassed, who live in fear for their lives on a daily basis, who cannot send their children to school or do not have their most basic needs met, including access to food and nutrition. Terrorism and transnational organized crime continue to be the most pressing security challenges facing the Sahel region, and I fear that we will grapple with them for many years to come. Against this backdrop, I can only express admiration for the G5 Sahel Member States who have taken their fate into their own hands and commend them for the effort they have undertaken over the past year to operationalize their joint force. As reported by the Secretary General, since the authorization of its deployment by the African Union Peace and Security Council last April, and the subsequent renewal of this mandate just a month ago, notable progress has been made. G5 member states have started to deploy their troops and to equip the command post and sector headquarters in all three sectors. Indeed, Burkina Faso and Niger have deployed a battalion each on their respective borders with Mali, while the deployment of the Malian battalion in the Liptako-Gourma Triangle is ongoing. The joint force conducted its first two operations in the central sector and undertook important first steps in establishing its human rights compliance framework, including defining screening and monitoring mechanisms to address human rights violations. Nonetheless, a lot of work remains ahead of us. The operationalization of the joint force has incurred delays and has yet to attain full operational capability. I call on G5 Sahel member states to relentlessly pursue the efforts made to date to deploy the remaining troops as quickly as possible so that the joint force can resume its operations. I also call on the G5 to further clarify the joint forces concept of operations and to come together to jointly define its end states and objectives. I also acknowledge that the joint force continues to urgently require equipment and training, including air and communication assets. These capability gaps are another important factor delaying the full operationalization of the joint force, and the support of the international community will be required to overcome them. While not underestimating the complexity of military operations, we also believe it is important to address the recent reports about allegations of human rights violations by security forces in the region as a matter of priority, as these may constitute obstacles for the provision of United Nations support. In particular, I urge G5 member states to take advantage of the efforts carried out by the joint force, MINUSMA and OHCHR, to establish a human rights and international humanitarian law compliance framework and cooperate for its rapid and effective implementation, including by supporting effective accountability mechanisms, ensuring the systematic deployment and presence of provost officers at the company level, and supporting the deployment of United Nations teams in G5 countries. Mrs. President, distinguished members of the Council, I also express my profound gratitude to the international community for their sustained and continual support to this important initiative. The outcomes of the International High-Level Conference on the Sahel on 23 February in Brussels are testament to this. At the conference, an additional 80 million euros were raised, bringing the total number of pledges in support of the joint force for the first year to over 400 million, almost the entirety of its projected budget for the first year of operations. The G5-Sahel Member States, the European Union, and the United Nations also signed the technical arrangement defining the scope and modalities for providing MINUSMA support to the joint force as requested by Resolution 2391/2017 and on which we briefed the Council on 13 April. I applaud the European Union for managing the coordination hub, which is not a small task. The hub is an important tool for coordinating and mobilizing member states and partners' contributions. I also thank the European Union for its own generous and important contribution to MINUSMA support to the joint force. However, I am also concerned that while the support mobilized by the international community to date is indeed commendable, the support mechanism, such as they have been set up by the Resolution 2391/2017, will require perpetual resource generation efforts to fund support to the joint force, including replenishing the African Peace Facility. In the medium to long term, it will be challenging to sustain the momentum achieved so far. What is more, the United Nations will continue to depend on others to be able to implement the support measures it has been mandated to provide to the G5 Sahel Joint Force by Resolution 2391/2017.
To date, despite the significant scale of the pledges received, the funding necessary to implement to the full support via MINUSMA to the joint force have still not been received. With the funds that we have received thus far, the mission is only in a position to be able to provide life support, consumable support, and CASIVAC support. MINUSMA still stands in urgent need of funds to provide engineering support, in particular to allow it to be able to provide assistance to the fortification of the G5 camps in Mali. In point of fact, the lack of secure operational bases in Mali has proven to be a major hindrance to the full operationalization of the joint force, hence the urgent need for this engineering support. Those troops that have already been deployed have to live and pursue their operations in the most arduous of conditions. Nonetheless, MINUSMA's own experience in Mali has made it abundantly clear that there need to be effective camp protection measures in place for a force to be operational. I would therefore call upon all those donors who have not yet done so to make a contribution, on those that have already done so to earmark additional funds for MINUSMA's support to the joint force. As you know, MINUSMA's support for the joint force is limited to Mali itself, which is part of the central sector or corridor of the G5 Sahel Joint Forces operations. I would therefore call upon donors to beef up their levels of support to the east and western sectors, which thus far do not enjoy the support of the United Nations, at least not directly. Finally, to date, Few of the amounts announced in pledges have been dispersed, and I would call upon donors to disperse the pledge sums as quickly as possible. Over the long term, and here I pick up on the recommendations made by the Secretary-General in his most recent reports, our overall goal needs to be to take time to think together as to what mechanisms would be most appropriate to establish to allow for predictable and sustainable financing. We should consider mandatory contributions as well as support measures for the G5 Sahel Joint Force to help more predictable and long-term planning of the operations of same. This would also provide for better support for MINUSMA as well, because they would know that their attention and resources were not divided, allowing them to more effectively fulfill their own mandate. President, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished members of the Council, when all is said and done, any attempt to overcome instability and insecurity in the Sahel will be doomed to failure unless it focuses on the link between development, peace and security. The interventions and the operations of the Joint Force will remain an initiative that is honed on security first and foremost, and we accept that. But these operations do need to be embedded within a more holistic and comprehensive framework by twinning what the G5 Sahel Joint Force is doing to initiatives aimed at improving governance, give better access to nutrition and basic social services, and provide opportunities for young people. The overall goal for all must be the implementation of the Mali Peace and Reconciliation Agreement, on which any stabilization effort in the region stands or falls. I hail the progress made thus far in the establishment of the Joint Forces Compliance Framework, but I remain concerned by reports of violations of human rights committed by local law and order forces. The Joint Force will unfortunately not succeed unless it enjoys the trust and support of the local population. I also welcome the efforts undertaken by the G5 Sahel to strengthen the Permanent Secretariat and to strengthen the links of this body with the Joint Force Command in Sevare. One of the key next steps to be taken, and one which I urge the G5 to pursue, is that of strengthening their ownership over efforts to operationalize the Joint Force, as well as efforts to mobilize resources for support of the G5 Sahel Joint Force, and I therefore call upon them to fully set up the support group. The establishment of said support group would allow for more coordinated and consensual cooperation and more systematic cooperation with the region, the African Union and other international partners, and would ensure that the operations of the Joint Force would be properly aligned with a broader strategy for the region as a whole. The United Nations' involvement and commitment to this key initiative is unshakable. It is the responsibility of all of us to ensure that the Joint Force does succeed. Thank you very much for your kind attention.